You're listening to Resist and Restore, a podcast from the Circle of Hope Pastors, where we're extending the table of our dialogue. I'm Johnny Rashid, and I use he, him pronouns.
I'm Rachel Sensenig, and I use she, her pronouns.
And I'm Julie Hoke. I use she, her pronouns.
Welcome to our show. I'm so glad to have you on. This is going to be a really fun show. In the middle of it, I interviewed Danté Stewart, who wrote Shoutin In The Fire. And we have a really, really fun and meaningful conversation. I hope that it nourishes you and that you can share it around to people that would be blessed by it too, because that's what we're doing. We're looking for people who would be blessed by the conversations we're having, the dialogue that we're sharing, and of course we want you to be a part of that. We're going to start first with Talkback. That's what we start with. Sorry, I forgot for a second. We're going to start with Talkback.
We got nervous there.
Esther, you got some. Esther, I called you Esther. Julie has something to tell us about. It's about Esther.
Yes.
Have you ever been called a name that wasn't your name?
Julia. I've been called Julia quite a bit. Mm. Anyway.
Some people think Rashid is my first name. That'd be common. I kind of have a two first name situation going.
Yeah, you were in my phone for a while as Rashid.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's good. Did you think my name was Rashid, or was I just...
No. This is like years ago when I don't know. I don't know why it happened. Because I never called you by your last name.
Yeah, I was just going to say, do people call you by your last name, Johnny? Or in high school, did they?
Yeah, Rashid or Sheed or something like that would have been common, yeah. Any nicknames for you, Julia?
Nice. I had to pause, like, what? Oh, you're talking to me. Okay, so Talkback. I'm bringing some Talkback that came from my Sunday meeting this week. I had the unique experience of watching this Sunday meeting via Zoom because I could not be there in person. And it was, first of all, just a joy to watch all of these gifted leaders leading us to worship. And Dr. Jim Getz gave a talk on the book of Esther, which he spent years studying and teaching to his students. And the Talkback was really engaging. People were chewing on this idea that God is not even mentioned in the book of Esther. And so Jim was, posing this, some of the history of how it made it into the Bible and some of the controversy around it. But a few of the women in the congregation, and I mention that because we're specifically focusing on women in the Bible, a few of the women talked back, just really encouraged by how, without the religious trappings of making all the sense of it or pointing to specific interpretations of what God did or what the people thought God did in the moment, just reading this story of how Esther acts in faithfulness in the midst of what could have been an apocalyptic situation for her and her people, it was encouraging to ponder her and how her ability to act and bravely face the being close to destruction. Anyway, Leah talked about just finding hope through women for women in general through Esther, specifically a marginalized woman who, in this story, used, her social position to just act in faithfulness and the power of that, of her faithfulness and her courage.
That's all really resonating with me, Julie, because our temple cell is studying the book of Esther right now, and it happens to be all women in our cell, and we have been we're only 3 chapters in, but we have been really encouraged by Esther's courage. She's fighting she's up against a huge system of patriarchy, not to mention racism and everything else going on there in the Persian Empire. But like, it's her story is so courageous from the jump, because like the queen in the first chapter, the queen gets de-queened for not obeying the king. And so for Esther to even, for her to come into this position and even consider not just playing her part is like life-threatening. Mm-hmm. Literally. Very inspiring.
Leah drew the connection specifically to women who speak up about abuse. Mm-hmm. And the courage that it takes, the vulnerable position that they're in the face of power, not knowing what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. There were surprising parallels.
And she was relating that to Esther specifically.
Yeah, that's where it was brought to mind. Mm-hmm. She was recalling stories of women of Brett Kavanaugh's, the woman who testified against him. I cannot remember her name.
Christine Blasey Ford.
Thanks.
She specifically recalled Christine Blasey Ford testifying against Brett Kavanaugh.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that was devastating when she was not believed or valued.
I can't think of the name exactly, but Queen Vashti's no to Xerxes, someone said it's one of the first no's that a woman said to a man, right? Because he wanted to drag her out to his party, but she was having her own party. It's interesting how that worked, Esther's courage and her estrangement from her own faith, her own ethnicity, and just being able to get along in the Persian Empire is significant, because the oppression she faced wasn't like the oppression that the Jewish people even faced in Babylon. It was legal to be Jewish. It just wasn't, it got so diluted, And so like she wasn't even open about her faith. And then to be said, to say it, that's why it's a story of pride for people to be able to stand up for like who you are when you're forgotten, when you're hated, when you're pushed away, right? And that's real special, for all of us to even think about.
Yes.
And honor that courage.
Mm-hmm. I think we really see God in Esther. Back to your original point, Julie. Mm-hmm. That's where God shows up.
Wow. Yes. And Jim was even pointing out like all these other leaders throughout the Old Testament have these explicit signs of God, the burning bush or the whisper on the mountain or the fleece, these miraculous signs that demonstrate what God's doing or where God is. But I love that you're saying Esther herself is the sign.
Totally. Totally.
Great. Thanks for the talk back. We hope that you'll have something to say about this episode. Write to us at Resist and Restore Podcast at circleofhope.net. We love to hear from you.
Can I ask you a question that's separate? This is unrelated to the talk box, so I didn't want to ask it. But like, this is just me asking you from your perspective. But some people say like Vashti had like a feminist sort of resistance, and how Esther kind of like uses her body in some ways, has like a different approach to how to like manipulate the king. And from your perspective, specifically as women, like how do you enter into that space? What do you think about that?
I love that you asked that, Jonny.
Because I've preached this passage a lot. I just don't. I don't know how to answer. I don't answer that question. I talk about Jewish nationalism.
Yeah, for me, it brings up how, unfortunately, like, women have been judged for resisting in different ways, and sometimes we judge each other, and that's just so terrible because we all come with different gifts and callings, and I love that they had two different approaches in their resistance, and I think there's room for all of it.
I agree, and I got real curious about this idea of the two banquets that she hosted and how she invited the king and Haman. Like, literally, she's between the man who owns her, essentially, and the man who wants to kill her and her people.
Right.
And how she hosts them and then brings them back and has another feast together with them. And I think it points to your question, Jonny, about like her using her body and her, I don't know. I just imagine in that, like, what all is happening during that. That's a lot of tension to hold for her, you know, to be at the table with these two men in this situation, knowing how high the stakes are. What is she doing? What is she thinking? And I just wonder about how she is relating to them, how she's reading them. She's reading the situation. She's thinking strategically. So, yeah, I agree with Rachel. There's lots of ways to resist, and that particular detail caught my attention this time. Just kind of imagining what it was like for her to not just have an idea about resistance or an idea about a strategy, but like to be in the room with them, eating with them, relating to them in some way, and then calling them together again. Like, what all is hatching in her brain as that's going on, you know?
Totally.
Yeah, it's really complex, and I like it's inspiring to me that she uses her power, even though we could say that the sources of that power are problematic.
You know, it's
that around her beauty and even this, you know, position that she has in alignment with the state power. She's using all of that to do something good. And so, wow, I love that that's possible. Even though we could break it down and say, oh, she if she divested of all that, you know, so-called problematic power, the Jewish people might have been decimated in that moment.
And further, if she reduced herself to how men saw her and diminished herself, that's submitting to patriarchy, right?
Right.
And she does her own thing, you know. She tells her uncle, gather all the Jews found in Susa and hold a fast on my behalf, and neither eat nor drink for 3 days, nor night or day. So she's leading, right? She's telling them what to do. And my maids and I will all so fast as you do. After that, I'll go to the king, though it's against the law. And if I die, I die. If I perish, I perish. Then Mordecai went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. So there's a hierarchy switch there. She's in charge of her body and herself, and she knows what she's doing. So, like, part of me is like, it would be pretty patriarchal for us to say, you can't use your body that way. You know, like, isn't that the point? Or, the other way, when the king says to Vashti, come to my party and use your body this way, she says no. So there's two ways to respond that are both resistance.
And Vashti's resistance made way for Esther.
Yeah, possibly. I appreciate that interpretation. That was just a question for you, for what it's worth.
So good.
Thanks so much for listening to our show. It's so glad to have you here. We want you to be part of our community, our our life together as much as you can. Listening to the show is one way you can do that. Please write back to us, Resist and Restore Podcast at circleofhope.net. We'd love to hear from you. And then share this episode. Share it on social media. And if you say, here's what I like about what Danté said or what Rachel said about Vashti, we can use that as talkback too. Subscribe wherever you listen and give us a high rating as well. And then be sure to visit circleofhope.church to find out what we're doing in our community, as well as to share money with us. We have a lot of things happening in our community, including cells and Sunday meetings, and we've raised over $16,000 for Black kids in our community to open up bank accounts for college savings. So tons of stuff that we're doing that you can be a part of and you can help contribute to. So this podcast is just a fraction of what we're doing, and you can be a part of all of it if you want. The invitation is open to you. Thanks again for listening. Hey friends, I'm so pumped to have Danté Stewart on our show with us. He wrote a book called Shouting In The Fire, an American Epistle, and it really documents his own experience of following Jesus in new ways for the movement of Black lives and Black liberation. And the way he tells his story is going to inspire you to follow in the same way. Can you tell us, Danté, what moved you to write this book, who you hope it speaks to?
Yeah. And first of all, bro, thank you so much for having me on. I love your work. I'm so thankful just to be connected, and in the many ways that, social media, brings our worlds together, bro.
So good to meet you this way.
Yeah, bro. You just think about how, I know this might be on the tangent a little bit. I just think I'm so grateful for the ways in which social media just introduces us to so many different people. Where somebody, can be in Philly or in Georgia and be doing the same and different type of work, but connect, on a deep level. I'm so grateful for that.
I am so grateful for it too. Yeah.
It's
nice when social media brings us together and helps us do something in common.
Yeah, 100. Yeah, 100. So what made me write the book? I guess I will begin with a prompt that goes from with the truth, then proceeds to the half-truth and moves completely to a lie. So the first truth is that I think I wrote this book because writing became the most safe and liberating way I felt for me to be present in the world. I as I think about my own story, even being a young kid, I've been many things to many people. I've been named many ways. I've been church boy. I've been a student. I've been an athlete. I've been Stu. I've been Danté. I've been minister. I've been this. I've been that. But writing and writer was really the first thing that I chose to be for myself.
I love that.
And it is wrapped up with all types of insecurity, feelings of comparison, wondering if I'm doing it the right way, wonder if I made the right career decision to say I actually want to be a writer, legit, I want to call myself a writer. I want to move in this world like so many of my friends do as writers, as a legitimate vocation. So, I want to do as best I can to learn as much as I can, to work as hard as I can about writing so that I can create surprising and deeply transformative and deeply vulnerable and loving stories, and in the end, make it as a writer. Now, let me proceed to the half-truth. A part of this book was also about giving other people language and frameworks to understand their own story. But then the only part about that is oftentimes this book was a messy process, and not knowing what that language was, or even knowing what type of things people would actually need in their stories and how to write about that in tender ways. I mean, there are some things we talk about, right? When writing, you're always talking about audience. And even when people submit proposals and things like that, one of the big questions is, who is this for?
That's right. It's the most important question.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh, this is for this person. And I was so sure of that. But as I started to write, I realized that was the half truth. I wasn't sure who that book was for. I realized that this book actually met me and met people in different places in some surprising ways, and some ways that I knew I was like, okay, these people are definitely going to, enjoy this. These people definitely going to like, resonate with this. But then in the end, I really wasn't writing it for anybody else. Like, and I guess that's why I'm struggling so much with the second book right now is that I'm trying to force myself out of this kind of like these kind of binary of like, okay, either you're doing your work for yourself or you're doing it for somebody else, or like, you're writing your book, or you got to like list the books your books are like and the competition your books are like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which I'm trying to kind of leave all that behind as best I can. So I guess that's the second way I can answer that. But then lastly, the complete lie is that, I wrote this book to teach white people to be better humans.
So funny, man.
I wrote this book for white people. This was my offering to them. But no, I'm just joking. I actually did write this book. That was a part of it because that's part of my story, is that like it's a young boy learning how to grow up in this country and become a mature, healthy, loving adult, and learning the language of grief, how to grieve yourself, how to grieve your faith, how to grieve your country, how to grieve your future, how to grieve the things you cannot change, and try and take that language of grief and give it to another person as an offering to be planted in their own garden.
What you write in your book, and we'll get more into this in a moment, but you're teaching oppressed people, and specifically Black people. But I think that if you're oppressed, whether you're a person of color, queer, disabled, whatever it is, to find hope in Christ, despite the tidal force against you to not, how you overcome white evangelical Christianity and still keep your faith. There's a lot of people that need to hear that, because it is hard to hold on.
Oh, 100%. And sometimes you don't.
That's right.
I am reminded of a conversation that happened between Juan Williams and the great Toni Morrison, of whose birthday is the anniversary of her death is coming up on August the 5th. And actually, shout out and love to James Baldwin, whose birthday is today. And the fact of the matter is that as Juan Williams asked Toni Morrison, how everybody goes through things, but how do you survive them?
Right.
Toni Morrison simply said, sometimes you don't. And that's the fact of life, is that not everybody survives the abuse of church.
No.
Not everybody survives or even finds a stable place to call home as they leave the kind of oppressive, ugly dimensions of religious faith that they are, that they experience. And I want to create room for that, because I feel like there was a criticism that I had to listen to in the past, and it's a worthy criticism. It's a worthy criticism that I've thought about deeply and tried to be better at, how to talk about it. That like, I have been fond of saying, that like many people didn't leave like the church or Jesus because they hated the church or Jesus, but they hated the ways in which like the church failed to look like Jesus and love like him.
That's right.
And somebody, even though it's a true statement, I think I'm that's a stake in the ground statement for me. Like that's just a fact of life statement. But then someone came and criticized and was like, "Yo, I feel like you're making it about like everybody like still being Christian." And I agree. I'm like, okay, I need to make room more for the ones who don't. And I think that's the fact of the matter, is that like not everybody holds faith or retains it or whatever we want to use to talk about that kind of experience, and how really, that is somebody's ability to grieve betrayal. When you talking about deconstruction, faith deconstruction and reimagination, that is also about like grieving when a precious thing betrays you.
Totally.
when something you hold dear and ultimate in the world not just lets you down, but becomes the actual arbiter of your own pain.
That's right.
Reminds me of Elie Wiesel's book Night. And like there was this one scene, if my memory serves correctly, where the main protagonist is talking about, God and the gallows, and how does one like retain this kind of faith in God when these people are able to use God the ways in which the Nazis did, when with the German Christian church, and the ways in which like the German Christian church, much like the white evangelical church today, is fueling so much bigotry, hatred, and destruction of the people. That main protagonist is like, like how can some really believe in this idea of God? And I think, sometimes you don't. But then also I want to talk about my own story. I wrote in the book that sometimes faith is giving up faith to begin again.
That's right.
And I worked out the story of the disciples on the road to Emmaus, where they were in Jerusalem, they were with Jesus a long time, and then they're on the road. They're on the road of depression. They're on a road of grief. They're on a road of anger. They're on the road of disappointment. And Jesus meets them, on the road, only reveals himself at the end of this particular pericope, and then leaves. He shows up, and then leaves, only giving them the memory of what they thought was lost.
That's right.
And so I think there is something powerful about retaining faith and also remembering your personal experience that you've had with God, with the divine, with others, and the ways in which that experience made you better.
Totally.
Speaking of James Baldwin, he said, I conceive of my life, as a journey toward that which I do not understand, but it is in the journeying toward that which I don't understand that makes me better. And I think one of the ways I've been able to hold on to faith is that I've developed, as I'm gonna use this kind of word, an alternative epistemology.
That's great. Another way of knowing things.
Yeah, 100%. Another way of naming the world, another way of seeing the world, another way of being in the world. One of the challenges and one of the problems is that people have left white evangelical churches, but they have not left white evangelical theologies. They have left white evangelical worship experiences, but they have not left white evangelical ways of seeing the world. And I can't blame them, and I would never shame them. I would never, make one feel bad for where they are on their journey. Yet also, I will usher them to see that there is so much more to faith and spirituality and wholeness and liberation and humanity, much further beyond the white evangelical space. And so much like, a Toni Morrison book, it's almost like break open the book and enter, and
Totally.
You find out where you land. And trust me, wherever you land will be the safest place for you to be.
You're saying you'd never judge someone for the journey they're on as they move away from whiteness and white Christianity. And I'm a brown guy, and I felt the temptation to stay with white evangelicalism. And you write in the beginning of your book that there was moments where you felt like you were distancing yourself from blackness. And you did so. You found essentially a white evangelical church, and you became a part of this movement. And, and your mom is sad about it, and your people are. You grew up in the Black tradition, and then why is it a temptation for us to want to join with whiteness? Can you talk about what happens to BIPOC in that moment when we want to become? I mean, I'll just speak for myself. I want to become white. I want to assimilate to white culture. We wanted to do that as immigrants because that's how you became incorporated. Why was that a temptation?
I think, bro, whenever you live in a world that tells you you're nothing or shows little to no regard for your culture, for your way of life, for your way of thinking, then it makes sense to go to a place where you are quote unquote celebrated, even if you have to lose yourself in the process. So killing a part of myself feels much better and much more healthier than erasing my complete self.
That's right.
And so I think there's a part of like this that's like just the sheer human desire to belong and to be accepted. And then oftentimes, when I'm thinking about myself, oftentimes like, when you're around white people, it's kind of crazy to think about. It's kind of interesting to think about. Like the world is like divvied up in terms of like, it's almost like whiteness is like an academic project. Like there's a part of whiteness that is almost like if anyone has any experience in the world, then they must name that experience against other people's experience and talk about it in ways that justifies it, that makes it like ultimate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like it's a weird thing. And so like many of the places we come from, we just live. We just caught up in life. We're not caught up in like proving or like all we, of course we have our culture that we name and things like that, but it's us. And so when we're around whiteness, there's a part of like us that feels like it has to be like proven or dissected or like made an academic discipline. And I think there's something appealing about that. There's something appealing about like believing that like, oh, this is the real way of talking about the world. Yes, I got my way of doing it, but this is really where the real world happens. And I think some of us are appealed that way, but I think some of us, just kind of want to escape, bro. And disappearance, oftentimes is like a safer place in the world than always having to think about the little deaths that happen in you every single day and the dying that happens around you every single day. So I'm reminded of like when Trayvon Martin happened, disappearance and escape was the easiest place for me to be. I'm here to play football. I'm not here to think about Trayvon. In my mind, I'm here to play football. I'm not here to think about, protests. I'm here to play football. I'm not here to think about this or think about that. I'm just here to do whatever y'all want me to do because I believe that this is the place I will fully and finally be successful.
It's like what Michael Jordan says, Republicans buy sneakers too.
Yeah, that's funny. That's facts. That's facts. And I think that's a part of it is like, some of us, we're our ones out, and kind of want to be accepted and want to be loved and feel as if, where we came from is not loving. When in actuality, that was one of the most loving places. We just didn't have the language or the framework to think about it as loving and healing and liberating. And it wasn't until we went into these other spaces where we saw just how unloving they are that we actually appreciated what we lost and trying to gain it back. So yeah, I think that's a part of it. Sometimes it's assimilation, sometimes it's acceptance, sometimes it's success, sometimes it's disappearance. Sometimes it's just context.
So we're not judging people for where they're at. We're understanding where we're at, and there's a way forward too.
Oh, 100%. And I think until like one is not free unless one is given the power to name where they are, and to do something about it. I was talking with a friend the other day. I went back to church. I was raised Pentecostal. And we were talking, he was just kind of, grieving this kind of stage of life he's in and feeling as if like, feeling as if this is just a struggle. Like he want different than where he's at and things like that. And so he asked me, like, how are you able to come back? All these years of being away, like 6 years, 7 years being away, how are you able to come back? And I just told him like, yo, bro, I'm free. I don't need this space. I'm free to come. I'm free to go. And I'm free not to let it affect me when I leave. And I think when one is able to do that, to say, here's what you have, I don't need it. If I want to be in it, I can be in it, but I don't need it. I can talk about it, but I'm free to do my work and live my life beyond it. So, yeah.
You have this great line in your book, and it describes some of the limitations of evangelicalism. You write, my soul was saved, but not my body. For Black people, for people of color, for oppressed people, Why is that difference so important? What's the difference between your soul being saved and your body being saved?
Mm. I think this goes back to M. Sean Copeland and just the ways in which, like, the way theology warped language. She talks about this in her brilliant essay on Beloved. And she's talking about, love and the body and Toni Morrison's Beloved, where she said that, when white Christians, encountered the word black, or Europeans encountered the word black from a language standpoint, they associated that with sin and associated whiteness with purity. And I realized that whenever you associate, something with sin and put that something on another person, then there's no way possible that you can actually appreciate or see or protect their body and their lived experience. Reminds me of many times in the Bible where Jesus is correcting the religious leaders and like y'all you say you love God, but you're treating other people as if they don't matter. You do all these religious and spiritual practices, but you forget the weightier things: justice, mercy, goodness, and being good to others and being good to yourself. And I think, this whole idea of salvation, and the body, when we think about race or gender or sexuality, many of the ways in which we think about salvation is that we must become less of ourselves in order to be loved by God. But in fact, God wants us to become more of ourselves to experience more of love. And it is in the experiencing more of ourselves and more of love that we experience the more of God. And I think one of the challenges is that, like, when you think about salvation and the ways in which, like, Christians have thought about salvation, it is not necessarily about making us become more. It's about making us become less. It's about you're getting rid of things in order to be ready for God to save you. You're kind of cleaning out things and throwing out things that made you who you are. And I think it's also because of, like, historically speaking, in pop culture or in culture in general, white people have oftentimes been the arbiters of religion.
Totally.
And they've been the only ones that's been able to speak in public about religion, or when people think about religion, or the terms like salvation and liberation and heaven and hell and grace and sin and goodness and mercy. Many of the thinkers are white people coming from white spaces. And so one cannot, love my body or take into account my lived experience if your theology never had room to believe that I was a full human person in the first place. And so my soul was saved, but not my body is also an indictment, on the ways in which, like, the body becomes a throwaway thing. But if we think about the Bible, the body is a sacred and precious gift.
Absolutely.
It is the place of liberation and revelation. One of the things I absolutely love about the Bible is, like, if you think about, like, Nehemiah and Jeremiah and all these names, right? These names have been received tradition as saying there is something of divine revelation that is bound to this name and this story. We call it Holy Bible. We call it sacred text. It's just simply a collection of lived experiences that have an embodied divine meaning.
Absolutely.
And I just wonder, why can their life be the only ones where divine revelation can be contained? Or in another way, if their life has been where divine revelation is found, then another person's life, my body, our body, the bodies of people who have been marginalized and put to the wayside, their bodies are also the place where divine revelation is found. And if we really want to talk about save or being restored or repaired, then that restoration and that repair does not happen without our bodies or the bodies of another.
Absolutely. And your transformation happened even by observing bodies and dead black bodies too. Can you compare? You talked about Trayvon a little bit when you were, I'm here to play football, not here to protest. And also with Mike Brown a little bit. Compare that version of yourself to your reaction to Alton Sterling's murder, Philando Castile's murder. You write about how witnessing these dead bodies changed you. In those moments with those last two that died, and George Floyd finally. What's happening in you? How are you changing? How are you radicalizing? How is your faith changing?
I think the best way to think about it is unearthing. It's almost like a garden being tilled or like bad weeds, being plucked out, and things like that. So like in my yard, when I treat my yard, I have to like get down in the gritty and get to the root of the weeds and pull them out, and I think about that type of unearthing when Philando, was murdered and Alton was murdered, and even Sandra Bland and Breonna Taylor, because I wrote this book in 2020, and I was thinking so much about, not just the deaths they've experienced, but the lives they live. So this is even like, when I was seeing these deaths, I was so much more concerned about experiencing them and writing about them as if their lives actually mattered.
That's beautiful.
So when people talk about like Black Lives Matter, it's not just about like protesting, a white racist, supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal world, like Bell Hooks would say, that's like addicted to violence and our suffering. It is also about being given back our stories to say we were actually living, breathing people who deserve to still be here.
Yeah,
so if you notice how I write about like their deaths, I want to do what the brilliant Dr. Courtney Baker writes about in her book, Humane Insight. I wanted to write with eyes of someone who experienced the death of a person who should have been loved. Now, I think that's the powerful part about it, is that like when Trayvon and Mike Brown died, of course I was in different contexts, or different, I was at a different place as a person,
Sure.
I just, I was more concerned about football and being affirmed than, when Philando and Alton Sterling died, I started to kind of get to the point where I was like wondering, like, who am I? Like, why am I here? Like, why am I in this white space? Like, what is it doing to me and things like that? And so ironically, their deaths unraveled the lies in me that believed like, okay, I didn't have to deal with what their deaths meant for this nation or meant for me or meant for the religious community that I found myself around.
Right.
And so if anything, their deaths pressed me deeper into myself, my story, our literature, our world. I wanted to say that, like, whatever way, in the many multitudes and multifaceted ways that our lives deserve space to be free and to live and to grow up and to mature and be well. I mean, I wanted to do that in as many ways as possible. I mean, that meant going to like books. That meant arguing online sometimes.
Sure.
But it also meant like going to the Black Museum in DC to almost like baptism. It was as if like after the unearthing, it was like being baptized again. That one goes in the water, and when one rises up, one walks in a newness of life. Life, if you think about it, yes, there are things we experience in our body, but life really, if we kind of get down to it, everything we experience in life is experienced in the imagination. It's experienced in how we interpret it. It's experienced in how we name it. It's experienced in how it feels to the senses, but how the brain tells those senses to perceive the world. Mm-hmm. And so, like, when I think about, like, it was me, like, when I think about these moments, it was me being baptized into a new imagination. But that new imagination was the old traditions that I came from. the stories that I came from, the culture, the art, the artifacts that I came from, and saying that our bodies are that artifact and they deserve the best things in life. And when you take that away from us, you take so much more than just a life. You take a destiny. You take a son. You take a daughter. You take a family. And you should not have the power to do that.
And this kind of thing radicalizes us, changes how we think about the gospel. When you witnessed and experienced the deaths of these Black individuals at the hands of law enforcement, you write, I was done talking about unity. I was done talking about coming together. It was time to talk about white supremacy. I want you to help our listeners know why unity and coming together, why is that in contrast with talking about white supremacy? I have my own answers for that, but I want to get your words about it. Why does one displace the conversation about the other?
Yeah, I think because unity is easy. It's, when you talk about unity, all you're talking about really is proximity, but when you naming white supremacy, you're implicating those who want to be unified in it. Unity tells us where we want to go. Dealing with white supremacy is telling us about the barriers that affect who we are. And as Baldwin said that, many people when they are afraid and when they hate, it's that once they give up, that they're afraid to lose that hate or give it up, because once they give it up, then they have to deal with the pain. And a lot of times that has been taken out of context. That it's just, so much of Baldwin, so much of the Bible, whatever, has been taken out of context. But I think what Baldwin is really saying is that, like, people hold on to hatred because once they give it up, then they will have to deal with how they have caused others pain. They'll have to deal with the ways in which, like, they are indifferent to the pain that is so normalized in this world every day. Totally. There's a difference, like, I think for me, between like injustice and indifference, and why, like, one chooses the language of unity over, like, talking about racism and white supremacy and homophobia and transphobia and patriarchy and sexism. People can, I don't want to say easily, but easily deal with injustice. The ways in which, like, a group are doing everything possible to make sure you lose. But it's harder to deal with indifference when, like, a group of people do very little to make sure that you win. It's easy to get out on the street in 2020 and talk about the ways in which, like, cops are doing everything they possibly can to make sure Black people lose in this life. Republicans and conservatives doing everything they possibly can to make sure progressives or those who are gay or those who are young or those who are women, to make sure they lose in life. It's much harder to deal with the ways in which we are doing very little as people to make sure others win at life. That's much harder.
When we witness Derek Chauvin's knee on George Floyd on the internet for 9 minutes, right? Yeah, it's easy to go protest for that. But when you keep chasing this sin of white supremacy, and then you find out that, it's in our churches too. It's in white people's bodies. It's in our organizations. Sometimes it's even in our families. That evil that we saw in Derek Chauvin, that's woven in the fabric of our country and even of our religion. It becomes a lot different. So you can protest the police brutality, but when you realize that the systems that uphold that are all around us, change the conversation. It's a lot harder.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And I think it's easy to say, unity and both sides, when you're on the side of power. Totally. And your rights and your dignity and your humanity isn't being stripped away.
That's right.
It's easy when you're on the winning side, when you're a winner in society. But the reality is, I wrote this the other day that being nice to oppressors never won to oppress their freedom. and that just because somebody wants me close doesn't mean they want me free.
That's right.
Proximity. I used to think that like preaching about unity and the gospel, and being near and close and being in relationships, would change people's hearts. But I realized that like, it's, the society is a history of heart dispositions in public. That's just a fact of life. Is that, whatever is the structure of our world, it is the gathering of hearts who want to keep the world oppressed and locked up and bound, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If we think about the history of this country and slavery, the oppressor, the enslaver, the system and conditions of slavery is the heart of enslavers multiplied in public. And so I don't think, changing the heart can change anything, unless we change the ways in which power dynamics function in our society and deal with our material reality together. And if we can deal with our material reality together, then one can unearth the ways in which one's heart disposition, and the ways one heart disposition makes one vote and one preach and one right, how that can be changed by a new type of rhythm, a new type of power dynamic, a new type of being together in this world. And I think it's on each one of us as spiritual leaders to do that necessary spiritual work that would change, as some people say, the soul of this nation. Yeah.
I love that. Unity that doesn't interrogate power dynamics is the unity. That unity falls on the shoulders of the most vulnerable, of the oppressed. You're asking people of color and oppressed people to put themselves in harm's way for the sake of unity, and that is not the gospel. Jesus puts himself in harm's way to protect the least of these. How did the work of liberation theologians, like James Cone, for example, change your perspective? How did that help you move out of of white evangelicalism? And talk about that.
Oh, 100. You see, I don't know if your listeners can see, but on my back wall, there's Toni Morrison, there's Baldwin, there's Katie Cannon, and James Cone, and I think for me, it's like I imagine that every day I sit down in my study and write and think that they're looking over me and watching over me and praying for me, and thinking about me and also cheering me on. So in some sense, like the first work that, liberation, traditions of liberation and womanist theology, and even Black literature did for me is first, it convinced me that I was not crazy about what I was feeling and what I was seeing.
That's right. That confirmation. So
yeah, 100%. I think one of the ways people hold on to power, especially thinking about race, is that they control language. They control curriculum. They control who gets to talk about what, when, and where.
Right.
And one of the first things was that, these traditions and these writings, let me know that I was not crazy. But then they showed me that I come from a place, that I'm not just doing this work on my own. I come from a people. I come from a tradition.
Right.
And that my job is to create out of that tradition, to wrestle with that tradition, to learn from that tradition, and to make that tradition better. So not only did they give me, that confirmation and that language, but I think one of the biggest things I think these traditions and this work gave me, was grace, bro. It was grace. It was the grace, that let me know we have been here before and we have come through.
That's beautiful.
We have struggled, but we have also made our life about much more than just struggle and oppression and fighting and resisting. I also know that the grace, the everyday grace of like having family members that lived what these writers are writing about, and the grace of being able to talk with them and to listen to them and to be a writer that continues to preserve their stories, that through all the insecurity and the doubts and the distrust of myself, I found a way to show up.
You do.
And I show up in the grace of that power. You know, grace is not just what saves us, but grace is also what empowers us. And I think there's a beautiful grace in receiving this tradition as my own and doing whatever I can to live in it and live out it.
Jesus loves bodies no matter who or where or what they are. That's a beautiful statement. And I think on its face, most Christians would agree with it. Why is it still a strong statement in the face of white evangelicalism? What does white Christianity miss about the idea that Jesus loves bodies no matter who or where or what they are?
Man, so many, and this is not just white evangelicals, much more. It's like so many Christians miss unconditioned love. We say unconditional love, but so much of that love is conditioned by being the right type of person, being in the right place, having the right type of heart disposition, you know, or having the right type of this or that. And I think what many of us Christians miss, bro, is unconditional love, is goodness. You know, when is the last time you heard a religious person, particularly out of these traditions you're speaking of, talk about the goodness of the world?
No.
I mean, the goodness of this world. Like, but the Bible says, oh, taste and see the goodness that is all around us. And I've been reading Ross Gay, Book of the Lights, and I've been reading Ed Young's An Immense World, alongside also Dr. Shonda Prescott Weinstein, I hope I said her name correctly, the Disorder Cosmos. And as I'm reading, and of course, I guess I'm on this kind of tip where I'm like really thinking about, you know, the natural world or this kind of cosmic universe or the light that's around us every day. I'm just so fascinated by the goodness around us that we miss every single day because we're trying to press God into something God already dwells in. And we're trying to fit God into something God already is immersed in.
Totally.
And the language and the work is not bringing God to it, but recovering and kind of uncovering the God that already exists in it. Totally. And I think that's something beautiful about, or tragic almost, about so many of our religious traditions, is that we are unable to spot the goodness that dwells around us every day. And we do everything we can to destroy it, whether through language or through practice. And I think, yeah, we need to return, or I don't even know if there was ever a moment. Maybe we need to now learn how goodness can be at the heart of theology and also can be at the heart of spirituality and liberation and love and community.
And for the oppressed people to hear that message, that there's all this goodness around them, that God loves them, and there's God's love and God's light surrounds them, is so important because so many forces every day tell us something different. You answer the question, what radicalized you, by saying white people radicalized me. And you go on and you say, I thought as a black Christian, my writing and my news must always crescendo on Sunday with shouts of joy and with people dancing to praise breaks and with lemonade and sweet tea and with disciples running to tell of the story of the return of the one who was murdered. That's a beautiful thing. But you said, I knew we all needed more than that. And white people destroyed that in me. Why? It seems to me like when we're talking about liberation, we jump to Sunday without remembering Friday. We jump to resurrection without remembering the pain along the way. White people,
Mhm.
from my experience, want to get right away to when everything's okay, as opposed to sitting in the horror that we live in at
Mhm.
times.
Mhm.
Why did white people destroy that in you? How did that change you?
I think because of the hostility and apathy in that moment. And as I read that line, that line always bothers me. I ain't gonna lie. Because I kind of I want to go back and revise that line. Because if anything, it really wasn't white people that radicalized me. Like it really was me radicalizing myself. Then and for me, I want to be so careful not to give white people that much power in my own
I
story.
appreciate that.
I want to scratch that line out of my book and change it.
Okay.
That's and there are many lines that I kind of
Well, we always go back and we think that.
yeah, there are many lines where I'm like, I'm uncomfortable. I was in a different place when I was writing this line. I was at I really want to tell white people F you in as many ways as possible. At that moment right now, and I'm like, yo, I'm not so concerned about you as I was in that 2020 moment when I was writing. And I think at that moment, yes, it was white people that radicalized me, because of their hostility, their apathy, their ugliness, their meanness. But what truly radicalized me was my desire to be free. No oppressor ever radicalizes anyone. It is always those who are marginalized in the idea of freedom is what radicalizes anyone to fight against oppression, to want to live. So I guess for the next book, I need to kind of revisit that line and say what radicalized me, the idea of freedom.
Well, Jesus, truly, right?
100.
I've been in those situations, though, where I'm shocked that there isn't more outrage. I'm shocked that we're not stopping to talk about this pain. And I realize, I'm in a place where people don't care about this. I'm in a place
100.
where they're going to keep saying, why are you making your race a problem? Why do you keep talking about politics? Why can't we just get along? Why can't we just have unity? And for me, that has radicalized me and showed me, no, there is freedom on the other side. I don't want to give credit to my oppressors, but seeing hope beyond their oppression helps me move into a new space. I love your writing. I love what you quote, and I love how you work. And towards the end of the book, you talk about singing in bondage. The bird must sing in a world that has him bound. He must open up his throat, flap his tender broken wings, and gather itself to travel far beyond the cage, the rough terrain, the terrible pain of its losses. How do we sing in our bondage? How do we sing in our pain? This is what I think your book really captures is, yes, we are oppressed. Yes, our backs are against the wall, as Howard Thurman says. Yes, we have a lot of forces oppressing us, but we can sing back. We're not going to be held down. Jesus is still alive in us and in the world, and there's goodness all around us. It's really hard for people who are tired and burned out and beaten down and just afraid of their own livelihood to be able to sing. What's your encouragement for folks to sing in their bondage?
I think one is able to sing or to keep hope when one has found power in discipline. And what I mean by this is that, like, showing up every single day for yourself and for your work does not always yield the fruit we desire, the harvest we desire, but not showing up costs us a lot more.
Big time. Big time.
And so I think one finds that power in the discipline of discovery, in the discipline of questioning, in the discipline of curiosity, in the discipline of adoration, in the discipline of wonder, in the discipline of wrestling, and the discipline of encouraging. And whatever word we use, whatever verb we use to describe the many ways we live beyond the gaze of those who do not like us, do not see us, and don't want the best for us. There has to be a way that one lives beyond their gaze if one is to be truly free. So that means for me, like when I left white evangelical spaces, I was done with the arguments.
That's right.
Like I'm pastoring in Black church, in a historic black church right now. And I'm so far removed from what's happening in the white evangelical world. And I'm the better because of it. Of course, I see what's happening in the news and what I see from like friends who's kind of still in that space. But like for the most part, my life, that's not one of my first experiences on Sunday morning anymore. And so for me, it's about like, there's so much more to life than simply talking about them or thinking about them. You know, I got this, mountain of work before me, as Alice Walker speaks of in Search of Our Mother's Gardens. She talks about her advice is for young Black artists is, to shut out all the noise and do the work, because there's a mountain of work before you. And she says, of course, it's hard to kind of shut yourself out because our people are waiting, yet we as artists and pastors and writers and poets and creatives and organizers and activists and entrepreneurs and visionaries, we need to find a way to kill the noise.
Totally.
So that we can hear the voice of our own soul.
I've been ministering in a predominantly white space for 12 years. I told you I'm going to take a break in a little bit. But what you're saying is, hey, I returned to where I came from in many ways. I'm preaching at a Black church right now, and that helps me keep all of this discouragement and all of this oppression just I'm not facing it on Sunday morning when I'm supposed to go and worship and give thanks and give gratitude and receive communion and be blessed. I'm not confronted with my own oppression in every moment. People of color need spaces of rest and Sabbath away, to put it blankly, from the white nonsense that hurts us.
Yeah. In general, as we as humans,
totally.
we need a rhythm of rest. And I've noticed that it's just kind of, I feel like so many creatives are feeling this. Like in 2020, so many people ran to our stuff, got what they needed, and left. And you talk about betrayal? That's betrayal, bro. To come, to exploit, to take whatever you need, and then to just simply leave us.
Yeah, so they looted, actually, if you want to use
No, 100%. No, 100%. 100%. They took what they need. They got who they wanted. They got what they wanted. And now things are back to normal. And if anything, with that, 100%. And if anything, and I'm trying to work on this myself, is that, I care little about what people think, in a sense of like the person who just came to get what they want and leave without no intent of like literally changing the world for people that look like us. I care little what they think about our work. I care little what they think about what we're doing. I care little about that. I do care that we actually were betrayed. Mm-hmm. But I don't care that like to prove that like that betrayal was like a real thing, or feel like I got to prove that you must like come back to me because of your betrayal. No, I don't want you. I don't want that. Bye. like, let's do the work for who wants to do the work, and realize that like life is not just simply about the work.
That's right.
We have to live. We have to be people. We're human beings. We have to be good to our body. Like, how can we be good to the world if we're not good to the body that is our own?
That's right. People who betrayed you, betrayed this movement for Black Lives. You're saying, no, I'm not going to chase after you. No, I don't need to convince you that you betrayed me. I'm going to keep doing this work with people who want to do it. You can do it, but my job isn't to convince you to do it. I'm going to keep moving. I love that.
100%.
After George Floyd's, we'll end here. After George Floyd's murder, and we experienced all of this, there was a moment where you say, these bodies, these Black bodies will not always suffer. These bodies will not always tremble. These bodies will live. You saw Black, beautiful bodies. It seems to me like what you're saying right there is exactly where you ended up. That you saw hope, you saw praise, you saw people inspired that didn't betray the work, that kept going. So what keeps your hope? How do you hold on to it? You addressed this already, but I'm just one more time. How do we hold on to ours? How do we hold on to Christian hope today? You found some in your current ministerial charge and in your writing. How do people of color talk to the oppressed specifically? You know, not to white people, to the oppressed. How do we hold on to our hope? What do we do? Do we find communities where people look like us, have our experiences, think like us? What else can we do?
Simple. Simple, but not simple. Trust your gut. Trust your intuition. You know what keeps you going. And we have been socialized and discipled in spaces that have forced us not to trust our gut. And I want to say, trust your gut. What your gut telling you? That's something that one of my best friends, every time I talk to him about experiences and like life decisions that I got to make, you know, he always give me the same advice. Trust your gut. Trust your gut. You know, because your gut don't lie. Your gut tell you that the life you want to live for yourself. Amen. Will your gut lead you to uncomfortable places? 100%. But your gut won't lie. Your intuition. You got to trust it. And in effect, what he's telling me is that you've been led to believe that you have to trust everybody else for what's best for your life. And this whole time, you never found a way to trust your own self. Yeah. And so how does one keep hope? Learning to develop a discipline where we trust our intuition.
Yeah, the Holy Spirit is right there.
Yeah.
Danté, thank you so much for this conversation. Before we wrap up, how can people follow you and find what you're up to? What are the best ways to follow you on social media?
At Stewart Danté C. That's me. I'm trying to step back from social media a lot, though. I ain't gonna lie. You know, I'm trying to, man, if I can get to a place where I can just like be done with it all together, I mean, that would be
hard for authors.
It's hard for authors, bro. Like you're gonna have to like be at a spot where you made it, you know, to where you're gonna have to be John Grisham.
You did pretty good with this one. What's your next book called? Do we have a title yet or no?
Nah. But I'm cooking up actually two big projects right now.
Okay.
That I'm working really hard on, stepping out the genre of nonfiction on number 3. Number 2 is going to be a nonfiction book. I kind of settled into I'm a kind of like memoir and essay type writer. Yeah, that's how I do my best work. I do my best work through like narrative nonfiction and, you know, blending, you know, like family history and politics and culture and literature. So that's my next project is going to be on that and really on grief and love and goodness and memory and things like that. But yeah, that's what I'm working on now. Awesome. Working hard on it, trying to get it right. You know.
Yeah, I'll look forward to reading it.
For sure.
Let's talk again.
Oh, 100.
The book that just came out from Danté is called Shoutin In The Fire. So you can get it anywhere books are sold and tell your friends about it. Thanks a lot.
100%. 100%, bro. Appreciate you.
Yeah, appreciate you too.
So we like to end all of our shows with a little note about what's been feeding our souls lately. And we call this spiritual show and tell because it's a chance to kind of bring to the surface what's been deeply nourishing us. So, pastors, what is it for you this week? What's been nourishing your souls?
What's been nourishing my soul is a man who has not nourished my soul ever before. And I'm going to tell you who he is. He's a senator from West Virginia, and his name is Joe Manchin. Now, Joe Manchin has blocked climate change legislation in the U.S. Senate for a long time. In this last week, for some reason, he seems to have switched his viewpoint and is now supporting a $370 billion act to combat, in part, climate change. It's called the Inflation Reduction Act. And what it will do, if it's passed, is help reduce carbon emissions in the U.S. by 2030 by 40%. And that would be the most significant, that's the most significant legislation ever passed confronting climate change in the U.S.'s history. And so, even though Joe Manchin has been my enemy for blocking legislation that's going to potentially keep the planet from existential catastrophe, I just want to give credit where it's due and say, hey, some people can change their minds. I feel a little bittersweet about that. I don't like saying it, but yeah, he did the right thing, and that makes me think like, because it was really bad. It was like the week where it was like hundreds of degrees in Europe, and it was so hot here, and then he blocked the legislation, and I was like, you know what? This is just how it's going to be. The whole planet's going to burn, and then that'll be it. And then I'm not saying this legislation is going to change everything, but it is a little bit of hope in the midst of despair. And so I try to take the wins when I can. So we'll see. It's not done yet. I just want you to know it's not. There's still another senator from Arizona who has to agree, but Kirsten Sinema would be that one. But that feels positive to me. Is that okay to share as nourishing my soul?
Oh, absolutely. That's super encouraging too. That we could change our mind. That's and right. It could make a big difference.
Yeah,
he's using his power for good.
Right. Any evidence of why?
They were able to just do politics with him. You know, he was able to. He was very worried about the previous bill it was in was called the Build Back Better bill, and that's the Joe Biden major legislation. And in West Virginia, Joe Manchin really believes that if he's sounds too much like a Democrat, he'll lose voters. Even though I disagree with him because I think poor West Virginians could use help, and I think that there are policies that could help them. That's what he said. So they changed the name to the Inflation Reduction Act, even though a small part of it is just a tax modification that could help reduce inflation. That was enough to for the politics to work. He's saying, I'm not advancing the Democratic agenda. I killed Build Back Better, and now we're doing the Inflation Reduction Act. So I guess that's his big fine, It's kind of annoying to be all right, fine, we'll just change the name. And then you can go with it. But whatever, the most important thing isn't the politics, or even the Democrats particularly succeeding. It's about climate change. It's about the planet. It's about, this isn't a win for Democrats. I think it's a win for people who live on the planet.
Humans.
Humankind, yes.
And all of creation.
I was just thinking that. Right. The whole earth. Yeah.
It's not small. How about you, Julie?
Well, mine's a lot more superficial than that. But I share it with hesitation because people out there who might completely disagree with me, that's fine. I watched Messiah on Netflix. I was sick this past week, and literally that was all I could do was lay on the couch.
That's odd for you. Very odd.
My family was like, "Oh wow, this is big." And I never binge watch. And I started this, I forget who recommended it to me, but I just started watching this show about, it begins in Damascus, and there's this street preacher who's preaching, urging people to stay calm, that they're not going to be captured by the Islamic State. And then his prophecy comes true, because there's this huge sandstorm for like a month, and ISIL pulls out, and the city is saved, and people start following him, calling him Messiah, and he leads them out into the desert to the Israeli border, and he crosses through the barbed wire and gets arrested. And his followers stay there; they camp out, and so there are these. That's where the story begins, and then he ends up getting this worldwide following. It's so interesting to see what it looks like to play out in like our modern day world. How people of faith are wrestling with, who is this man? Is he a charlatan? Is he the Messiah? They wrestle with border crises and refugees and just all kinds of issues that are present in our world, and what this Messiah has to say and do. And then what people, and he continually puts it back on the people who are following him. He's kind of like, what are you going to do? They're like, what's your plan? We'll follow you. And he's like, what are you going to do? So there are these beautiful speeches throughout the whole series, and I just kept watching.
You watched the whole thing, Julie?
That's
wow.
good. Shall we watch it?
How many hours was that?
There's 10 episodes.
Wow.
Do we need to get?
And then it was
do we
canceled.
Need to get COVID to watch it? Is that like this?
Please don't. No. I don't wish it on anyone. But I couldn't sleep. I felt that bad that I couldn't even sleep. So it really was, all I could do was just lay there.
Sounds very stimulating. What Dr. Martin Luther King has been nourishing my soul this week. We're doing this series in our Sunday meetings on the parables of Jesus, and I wanted to talk this week about the friend who knocks at midnight on his friend's door asking for bread. And because this is like I think Jesus was thinking of South Philly when he wrote this parable, because this has happened to me. Neighbors knock on my door in the middle of the night, and I'm irritated. But anyway, the friend in this parable gets denied at first. The person inside says, I can't, I'm already in bed, can't get up, won't get up. But the friend keeps knocking, and Jesus is saying that we should be that persistent in crying out for justice and mercy in the world. And so instead of I knew that Dr. King had preached this great sermon on this parable, so I thought, let me see what he says first. And I was just so literally nourished listening to his voice. I was just so grateful too that somebody had recorded, that we can hear his actual voice all these years later, and he speaks so slowly and with such conviction, and he's laying out all these things that we can do to keep crying out for justice and mercy in the world. And at the end, he gets vulnerable, and he says, I get discouraged. To be honest, I get discouraged sometimes from just continuing to knock and things not changing. But the Holy Spirit keeps reviving my soul. And then he just goes into how Jesus promises to never leave us or forsake us. And I'm just so grateful for his faith and
That's awesome.
His example and the work that he did, that we must continue. So yeah, Dr. King, Dr. Martin Luther King. Thank you, pastors, for offering all this nourishment. I hope that you listeners are nourished in some small way through the nourishment that God keeps giving us. And whatever's happening in your life, we would love to hear about it. So please write to us at Resist and Restore. And we would love to talk about what's nourishing your souls as well. Nice. Jonny, you make your chili, your Texas beef chili is my favorite.
I do like that chili a lot.
I tried to make it one time. It just did not turn out like yours.
We used to have, I feel like during Christmas, we ate a lot of chili for some reason, a few years. I think chili's a winter food.
That makes sense. But for some reason, I associate it with like hot summer days not for some reason, I know why. Because when I was a camp counselor for a summer in New York, we would take the kids out for like camping in the woods.
It's a good camp food.
We would make chili, right? That was like the meal. And so I'm used to like, it feels like at some point every summer, I like crave chili in the hottest days because it just feels appropriately like summer.
I'm against seasonal food, though. I think like chili comes from like, in barbecue comes from like the south of the US, kind of mixing with like Mexico flavors. And like, it's always hot down there. So like, where do you think chilies grow? You know? So like, it's I think it's an actually warm climate food. But in the north and in northern Europe, because the homes are trying to keep heat in, you can't turn on your oven or else you heat your house up, which is kind of the point of ovens to an extent in some places.
I think ice cream is an all-season food, just for the record.
So let me ask you this. If it's 10 degrees outside, you're going to eat ice cream?
I would eat ice cream any day of the year.
Outside even?
Wow.
No, I wouldn't go outside to eat it. I would stay bundled up inside.
But if you think about it, if you eat ice cream outside,
it wouldn't melt.
It doesn't melt, right? Isn't that you're eating it like in a freezer? That's the ideal habitat, really.
No, I like when it gets a little melty and soft.
I cannot eat ice cream in the winter.
Jenny's ice cream melts so they this is what they say on their website. It melts so that the aroma comes to you perfectly. Because you can smell melty ice cream more than you can smell frozen ice cream. It's nice. It's good ice cream.
Have you tried the waffle cone yet, Jonny?
Yeah, it's nice. It tastes good. The whole place smells like a waffle cone.
Where is Jenny's? I've never
They're all over the city.
This.
There's one in Frankfurt. There's one in Center City that I saw. And then there's like in Randhouse area. And then there's one in Fishtown.
All right. I'm putting it on my summer bucket list.